Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome, Andrew and Christina. Free speech is a topic that just keeps coming up, and I'm excited to have with me two college leaders who have actually made some progress in having controversial speakers speak on campus. This session is going to be about tools and tactics and things that are actually working in terms of bringing these controversial speakers who have been discussed repeatedly today onto campus. Andrew, we heard earlier Senator Lamar Alexander mentioned Charles Murray. Obviously, there were big problems at Middlebury College earlier this year. Michigan hosted Charles Murray last fall, and he completed his speech. How did that happen?
So that's a terrific question, Rebecca. It's great to be here. When we first learned that Charles Murray was coming on our campus, he'd been invited by a student group. The first thing that we did is we put together an engagement team, and that engagement team included the academic leadership of the university, our student affairs people, our public safety people, our facilities people, to have a dialogue with the students who were organizing the talk, to learn about what their goals were, to let the students know that we were fully committed not only for the right of the speaker to speak, but the right of the audience to hear, and the right of those who wanted to express dissent to be able to do so in a way that didn't preclude the other's rights. Those discussions were about lots of tactical things, including where the location of the talk would be, what access would look like. The students decided that they wanted to limit it just to University of Michigan students, which made things a little bit easier. Our public safety folks put together a plan to figure out how we were going to do things in case there was a disruption.
Indoors is better than outdoors, you found?
Typically it is, because you can control the space a lot better. And that's certainly what we did in this case. So Professor Murray came to campus. He began his talk, and we had a group of students who disrupted the talk such that others in the hall couldn't be heard.
They got up on the stage, right?
Well, initially, Professor Murray actually invited one of our students to come and debate him on the stage, which lasted for a while. And then that ended, the student went back, and the protest continued. And we have a protocol for dealing with this. It's called our heckler's warning. It begins with step one, where we ask the hecklers to please be quiet so that the speaker can be heard. We reiterate some of the principles behind that when we do so. That's step one. And then we typically wait for about 5 minutes. We waited about 5 minutes and nothing happened. Then we move to step two. And what step two is, no, really, we'd like you to please be quiet. And if you choose not to be quiet, we're going to ask public safety to remove you from the venue. What happened in the Murray incident is that after that announcement, the protesters left the hall. And so thereafter, Charles Murray was able to give his speech, Q&A, 40 minutes long, and the evening concluded without any further incident.
Christina, Brown University hosted conservative speaker Guy Benson. There were no incidents. He finished his speech. Brown was actually cited on the op-ed page of the Journal for staring down the censors, which may have been a first.
It was definitely a first. I was pretty happy about that.
How did it work at Brown?
So we had rolled out a new event disruption protocol this year, and it combined things we've been doing anyway, but it really formalized it. And you know, I have to underscore what Andrew said, which is you have to start with discussions with the students early, often, and with the students who are hosting the event, with groups of students who might be unhappy about the event. That's I think it's 90% of the battle. The other thing to keep in mind is what we're aiming for. We're not aiming to eliminate protest, right? We actually think that protest is valid, sometimes necessary, but we're aiming for the right of the speakers to speak no matter what. So, you know, we have a protocol that probably goes through a lot of the same tactical types of things that you do. One thing that we've never had to put into effect is the idea that if something happens that the talk just really can't go on in the space where we had it, the speaker is removed safely. That comes back to the Middlebury issue where that was a problem, right, to a place where they can live stream their talk back into the hall. And the thing is, the speech goes on. It just has to go on. Now, we've never had to take it that far, and I hope we never do. But that's part of the protocol, too.
Yeah, let me amplify one thing that Chris said, and that has to do with engaging with students. One of the things that doesn't work very well is waiting to engage with students at the moment where there's a particular incident. Right? One of the things, we have a terrific student life staff at the University of Michigan who engages student groups of all types all the time, such that we have the relationships, we have the social capital, such that when something like this pops up, we're able to work with the students who are organizing, the students who are likely going to counter-protest. If you come in late in the game, it makes it a lot more difficult.
Right. The other thing we've started this year is we have these teams of trained students. They're called multi-partial teams, which means they don't really take any one side, but they are able to see all sides. And they're trained to really work between the student groups and to talk to students. And sometimes that works better than having administrators, right?
For sure.
Yeah, for sure.
How important is it to have a clear policy on free speech? I came across Brown's, which says that the university must be a place where ideas are exchanged freely. Individuals cannot decide for the entire community which ideas will or will not receive free expression. Is that something that's communicated to all students from orientation day on?
Yes, that is. It's something that's communicated to students the summer before they start, and I speak about it pretty often. I think it's a great part of Brown's history, that in the 60s, this very clear policy was articulated. It also says that any student organization or faculty member can invite any speaker of their choosing to campus.
Can you go, you told me earlier about the background of that, which is quite striking.
So the background of that policy, which I remind students of when they object to it, is this was during the 60s, and it was a time when the university president did not want anti-war protesters, you know, left-wing types, civil rights coming onto campus. And so the policy was really put into place to protect people who wanted to bring in anti-war protesters, civil rights activists. And it's persisted over time. So if I have students who complain about it, I say, look, this policy has stood all groups well over a period of over 50 years now.
So Andrew, you are head of LS&A at Michigan, 20,000 students. You're a public university. You have different obligations than Christina does, right?
We do have different obligations, and I think the obligations make things a little bit easier at a public university than it is a private university. I mean, we're bound by the First Amendment. And First Amendment law is pretty clear about what are the things we can and cannot regulate. There's a very high bar for regulation. Things have to be content neutral. You can talk about time, place, or manner, but we can't get in the line drawing business. We have that to fall back on. Now, I think one of our big challenges is that we're not doing a terribly effective job educating our students what the First Amendment means and what the implications are not only for their lives on our campus, but their lives in generally. I think that's a place where across higher education we could be doing better. You know, Chris is in the more difficult situation as being a private university, is that there are some lines that can be drawn. There are things that can and can't be done
legally.
In a private, legally.
Right.
I mean, I think you and I would agree that from a set of first principles about academic inquiry that there shouldn't be any of that line drawing.
And sometimes that's harder. You know, it's sort of easy to say to students, sorry, it's the law. We have to do it this way. It's a little bit harder to say, you know what, we're a university and we're here to produce knowledge, and free inquiry is a vital part of that. And so we have to do this because it's grounded on our core principles. I think most people at Publix would agree with that.
Absolutely.
But we have to make that case.
Where do you both stand on the issue of safe spaces and, you know, areas, free speech zones? Do you have them?
So I don't really actually know what a safe space is. And so we might or we might not. And so I don't know how to define that term.
We'll talk about the tension maybe that you're...
Yeah, so I mean, there is a tension. I mean, the tension is that we have many different groups of students who feel like their voices are not heard. This is true for many of our conservative students on campus. It is certainly true of underrepresented minority students, students who are members of religious minorities on our campus. And many of our students feel at times unsafe when they are in the presence of ideas and speakers that they're not comfortable with. I think our obligation is do what we can to support our students, to help educate them, but to remove them from situations where they're in these difficult, intellectually and emotionally difficult circumstances isn't going to serve our students well in the long run. You asked about free speech zones. I mean, from my perspective, the campus is a free speech zone. People can gather and protest and speak wherever they want, as long as it doesn't interfere with our educational or scholarly mission.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree with that. The discussion around safe spaces has been complicated by the fact that people talk about them. I don't think anybody knows what we're talking about, but there are many different meanings. We had a reporter call the campus at the height of the safe space debate and say, how many do you have, and is there one in every building? And okay, I'm thinking like padded cells in every dormitory where you can go in and you don't have to hear things. So again, it's about supporting students. It's about helping students be comfortable expressing minority views. I think that's really important. And we can't take away how hard it is to express a minority view, but we can help our students kind of discover how to do that.
But let me push back just a bit. I mean, didn't Richard Spencer and what happened at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville change the equation a bit? I mean, this is a protest that that ultimately turned very violent, and it to many people changed the obviously everyone's in favor of free speech in principle, but many in those situations feel threatened.
And I think that's a really good point to make, because while we don't regulate speech, we do have to provide an environment for learning and working that is not a hostile environment. That's another one of our responsibilities. And, I don't know how, torch-wielding people walking onto campus, this is hostile. And, we have policies in place that would have prevented that from happening. And again, it's part of the education with students and members of the community about how these two things coexist. Sometimes they're gray zones. It's hard to say what's hostile, what isn't. We grapple with it all the time, as I assume Michigan does too.
Absolutely, and I mean, back to the tactical point. I mean, in a situation where Richard Spencer or someone of his ilk is coming to our campus, we have to be profoundly concerned about the physical safety of our campus, and we need to rely on our public safety folks, as well as state and federal law enforcement, to help us make good judgments about the right way to manage the situations and perhaps exit if there's an imminent threat.
Michigan obviously had a big debate over Richard Spencer, who was at Michigan State, was going to come to Michigan. You were pushing to allow him. He ultimately didn't come, but you had a sit-in in your office over it. You personally, I think, have become a bit of a subject of controversy on campus over this, right?
How long were you out of your office?
About 4 or 5 hours.
Okay.
So just a nice stroll around campus. No, it was, we had an extended debate on our campus when Richard Spencer applied to rent a room and come and have a talk. Ultimately, the university decided that we would negotiate with his attorneys. We were unable to successfully do so, which means he never came. He went to Michigan State and then decided to stop his college tour thereafter. What led to the situation with our students is that we had a group of students and some faculty colleagues and staff members who organized a Stop Spencer campaign. It included a student strike on a Thursday afternoon, and I had faculty colleagues contacting my office saying, what am I supposed to do on Thursday? And my answer to the question is, what do you mean, what are you supposed to do on Thursday? We have classes on Thursday. It's your obligation to teach. You might want to use this in your classroom as something to teach about, but to walk away from our educational mission because some students don't agree with the policy of the university, it's not the right thing to do. And so in the process of articulating the principle and setting expectations for our instructional faculty, I upset a handful of our students, which is one of the joys of academic leadership.
Yeah, something I just want to get in here, and it's sort of related to what you just said, maybe not directly, which is you can have the best policies and protocols in the world, and what it does is it reduces the risk of disruption. It does not make anybody bulletproof. So we're sitting here come September on either of our campuses. Something could happen that our policy really doesn't address. I think that's important to think about this as a risk reduction issue, not a
solution.
Not a done deal.
Before I open it to questions, I just want to ask, how much time are you dealing with this? And what's your view of, I mean, this costs a lot of money, right? Security, all of the preparations that need to be made to have, controversial speakers. Is this something that you're seeing? Is it much more of your time than you've ever spent before? Is it increasing in the past couple of years? And are you concerned about the cost of it, both the actual cost and a distraction cost?
I'm not, look, I don't personally spend that much. I was very involved with developing the protocol, and I think the people who are executing the protocol and making sure they know what's going on campus and working with the student groups, they are spending a lot of time on it. That's what they do. I think now that we have the protocol, we're everybody knows what to do. We don't have to gather together and say, oh no, how do we handle this? So in some sense, it's become easier. Brown's experience is not the same as California's. It hasn't been expensive to date, so we will cross that bridge if we came to it.
Andrew?
I don't really have much to add. I mean, in terms of my personal time, it's taken a little bit more over the last 2 academic years than it did before. The real expense is on the team. There's so many people in so many different parts of the college and university who are spending time on some of these issues that could be spent doing other things to further our mission. The actual cost of, it's expensive. The University of Michigan's a big place. We have a very big capital plant. We spend a lot of money on security. I don't think that we've seen any dramatic increases in cost. But it is something that institutions have to be mindful of.
When you look at Berkeley and what happened there, and obviously Berkeley is the home of the free speech movement, what lessons do you draw, really? What are you trying to, you must have looked at that and said, I don't want that to happen on my campus.
I certainly did. Yes. No, we're looking at this with horror. But again, that was part of this impetus to saying, okay, we cannot be reactive. We have to start way back. We have to be proactive. We have to make sure that we don't get into a situation where something like that can even emerge. And that to me, that's the main lesson.
That's great.
Okay, are there any questions out there? I could go on.
Hi, Doug Haynes from UC Irvine. I really want to acknowledge what you're doing at Brown and Michigan. In the wake of Charlottesville last August, it became clear that campuses need to do more about free speech and define the terms. You sort of described the techniques and strategies. But one thing we also learned, at least at our campus, is that we have to sort of elevate attention to extremism, particularly in a moment of growing polarization, at least so that we can have a common vocabulary on our campus. And so we launch a Confronting Extremism initiative that mobilizes our mission to sort of understand what it is. And I wonder to what extent is taking a more vigorous position in the public's domain about issues and ideas, in some sense to direct attention to apply our practice of critical thinking and reasoning, rather than waiting for a controversial speaker to come to campus whose sole purpose may very well be to provoke.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And one of the things that we're doing in Michigan is we're thinking about how to do that within the curriculum and then how we do that type of capacity building outside of the curriculum. We have a course called Beyond Partisanship, led by a faculty colleague named Skip Lupia. And what the purpose of that course is to try to find those sets of problems where 70% of Republicans and 70% of Democrats can agree that it's a problem to be solved and can work together to constructively find a solution. We also have a student group called We Listen, which is organized by students from both the left and the right who have facilitated conversations on very controversial issues on our campus, including abortion, immigration, and so forth. That student-led effort has had real impact on our campus, and our students being good entrepreneurs, they're going to be going national. So I expect you're all going to be hearing about We Listen on your campuses. That type of proactive capacity building, just like the proactive engagement with students and faculty across the board, I think that's our obligation in this current environment.
I mean, the other, and I agree with what you've said, the other thing I found myself doing more and more over the past several years is talking about our values as a university community. And, free speech does not mean that I have to condone what happened in Charlottesville. I had a letter out to my community within 24 hours saying that it was horrific, and it cut against every value that we hold as a community. That's not a liberal position, it's not a conservative position, that's grounded in our belief in respecting human dignity. So I've become much less, much more outspoken about values and helping students think through what they want their values to be.
Any other questions?
Hi, my name is Michael Preston. I'm with the Florida Consortium of Metropolitan Research Universities, and prior to taking this role, I was in student activities and student engagement for about 20 years. So we worked with a lot of the students that would want to protest on campus and were responsible for the free speech and expression policies that were happening, in particular at the University of Central Florida. We found that we were working time and time again with the same 5% of students. Every year it was almost like rinse, wash, repeat. Same 5% of students, and what we were finding is that there was an erosion of the kind of central core of civic engagement for our rank and file students. So whenever we would get a strong reaction from our students, it was typically because they were misunderstanding what kind of their civic engagement responsibilities were. Can you speak a little bit on maybe us getting back to some of those core civic engagement principles that a lot of higher education has been really maybe missing out on?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, there are a lot of times these debates on campus, the really fiery debates, are driven by extremes. And that's true probably in the world at large. And so, paying attention to students who are, more in the middle, doing things like bringing students together to talk about issues. We have a civic engagement project through our Center for Public Service, for example. I think after the election, that really galvanized a lot of interest in civic engagement and what that means among a really broad swath of the community. So this is a good time to reach out, develop programs on campuses that encourage engagement in civic life and encourage discussions that are sort of town square type of events. So
the other thing that I think is important to keep in mind is that we're educators. Right? And we can, we educate in the classroom, but we educate in lots of other places on our campuses as well. And to use these interactions with student groups, to use town halls, to use facilitated conversations, for us as the academic leaders and the faculty at our universities, to put on our teaching hat and think about how to use those spaces to help better educate our students about civic engagement is all to the good. And as long as we keep that in mind, reinforce our core principles, the world's going to be a better place.
Time for one last very quick question. If we, right here in the front.
I can do it without a mic, if that's okay.
If you could use it.
I'm Joe Glover. I'm from the University of Florida. We had Richard Spencer visit our campus last fall. One of the things that we found that really hasn't been addressed on the panel so far is that different student groups lived in different realities when Richard Spencer visited. Some of them experienced visceral fear. It was not a matter of whether or not he should have the right to speak. They were viscerally afraid of him because of his organization, what he stood for, his policies, his advocacies. How do you address this, and how should you address this when you meet such circumstances?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a very difficult question, because you can't tell people that they don't feel afraid if they feel afraid. And again, if you work with groups early enough, it's sort of, how can we make you feel comfortable? What can we do to address those concerns? Let's talk about what our security plans are going to be and how we're going to, protect our students from what they might be afraid of. But again, there's no magic solution for that. I think it's one of the realities of these types of events.
I'd like to thank you both for a fascinating conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much.